Huh? Oh, sorry. This is Danny from Geeks of Doom on YouTube, and I'm back with my MCU rewatch covering all the MCU movies from beginning to end, counting down to Black Widow on May 7th. Like I said in my Iron Man 3 review, 2013 is not my favorite year for Marvel films, and Thor: The Dark World was not a great comeback from what I felt was a subpar Marvel film. A good movie, fun in parts, but an overall underwhelming effort for me, Iron Man 3. Thor: The Dark World did not get the franchise back on track. Thor: The Dark World had a very strange production. Patty Jenkins was actually in talks to direct this film, which made Natalie Portman, Jane Foster, very happy. And then somewhere along the line, there were creative differences, and Patty Jenkins stepped down. Natalie Portman was not very happy with that. I think you can kind of tell in her performance in this movie. She's not as lively and excited as she was in the original Thor, which I genuinely love. And this movie kind of feels inconsistent and all over the place. And the biggest issue with this movie is that it commits the cardinal sin of action adventure movies, and that's that it's boring. The first hour of this movie is really boring. We get right involved with the plot of this movie at the beginning. With the ring, you can't have an open box with cats. It's just a bad idea. With the Rainbow Bridge broken, Thor, the Warriors 3, Lady Sif are going around to all the other realms trying to correct the imbalances that have been going on. And meanwhile, a 1 in 5,000 year event is about to take place, a convergence of the 9 realms. And this brings up Malekith and the Dark Elves. Malekith is... there's no way around it. It's him and Mickey Rourke for worst villain in MCU history. And it's not even Christopher Eccleston's fault. I think he's a really good actor. I love his voice. I love the way he articulates words. I thought he brought so much to the silliness of Gone in 60 Seconds with Nicolas Cage. I'll never forget his line in that movie. Nicolas Cage and his brother, his name was Memphis Reigns. I'll never forget that. And when Nicolas Cage volunteers to take his brother's spot, Christopher Eccleston goes, "One rains is just as good as another. When it rains, it pours." He says some kind of crappy rain analogy, and it was just so funny. The way his accent articulates the words, I just love that line read. So I was actually kind of excited when I heard he was cast as the villain here. I just wish the villain wasn't so boring. He's a dark elf who is looking for this magic goop, the ether, which we find out later is the reality stone, the red reality stone. And he is defeated by Odin's father years before, and he's coming back for the convergence to find the ether. Jane and Darcy, they find this like kind of in-between world where these weird things are happening on Earth. And eventually Thor comes down after Jane accidentally finds the ether and gets basically possessed by it. It takes over her body. Thor, she for a very brief moment becomes invisible to Heimdall, who can see everything, and Thor travels to Earth to find her. And he brings her back to Asgard. And all of this is taking place in the first hour of the film, and if I've made it sound interesting, I'm doing a better job than the movie does, because it's really boring. It feels like they are just hitting plot devices to get to the big second act scene. We get this invasion scene where the Dark Elves attack Asgard. And it feels like you feel like the MCU turned off and you're watching a Star Wars movie. Because a spaceship enters into Asgard, breaks off into smaller spaceships that feel like TIE fighters or X-Wings, and the noises they make they sound like every Star Wars space battle you've ever heard. So it's a cool scene and there's some good effects, but it feels so out of place. Meanwhile, the best part of this movie, Loki, Tom Hiddleston, he's languishing in the Asgardian jail. A dark elf possessed by the ether is darkness, breaks all the prisoners out of the Asgardian jail. And another thing that I do like about this movie is you get more Anthony Hopkins and you get more Rene Russo as Frigga, the Queen of Asgard. And there's a really good scene with her and Loki. There's another good scene with Thor talking to his father. And these are good scenes. It's just that they're taking place in the middle of this very slow-moving, very weird Marvel movie. At around the 55-minute mark, which I know is almost an hour into this movie, good stuff starts to happen. Thor realizes that he has to go after Malekith and the Ether, and they've killed Frigga, Rene Russo. She's killed, and he basically takes the Warriors 3. They release Loki from prison, and they ask Loki to find them his secret passageway off of Asgard. And at this point, we get Thor and Loki together on screen. And it is easily the best part of this movie. To the point where Loki is antagonizing Thor, and he is like, fine, you don't want to talk to me? And he like morphs into a random soldier, and he goes, oh, maybe I'll become one of your new friends. And he has this amazing scene where he morphs into Chris Evans, Captain America, in full gear. And he's in Chris Evans' voice, like mocking Thor. It's fantastic. And it's a great MCU moment, beating a broken record already, a dead horse. It's a great MCU moment buried inside of a kind of a subpar Marvel movie. It's fine, but it's like Iron Man 3 for me. This is towards the bottom of the list. And it's sad because there is a lot of good stuff in there. The director of this movie is Alan Taylor. Like I said, Patty Jenkins was supposed to direct this movie. If you've seen Wonder Woman, you know what Patty Jenkins can do with the mascara. I can only imagine what she would have done with Asgard as like a color palette, and I just feel she would have made such a more vibrant movie. This movie is about Asgard. It's about the 9 realms converging, and somehow it feels, pardon the pun because of the title of the movie, but it just feels dark and bland, and it's very gray and dark green, and the colors don't match. Kenneth Branagh's first movie, Thor, is so bright and colorful. And then, my goodness, Taika Waititi just turns it up to another level when we get to Thor Ragnarok. And this movie just feels kind of like, the boring middle child, so to speak, of the Thor franchise. And I do like the Thor films, parts 1 and 3. I enjoy those. The big climactic battle, again, there's a lot of, because of the convergences, and there's this all complex gravity science that Selvig and Darcy are throwing around, and people are getting hit in one world and they're floating into the other realms. And it's okay. It just doesn't do it for me. I feel like at that point you kind of have checked out of this. The movie also tries to kind of position Lady Sif, played by Jamie Alexander, as like an alternative love interest to Thor, but then they never go anywhere near that direction. Like, they set it up, but then instead of playing on that, they just kind of leave that thread hanging, and to the point where Lady Sif is not even in Thor Ragnarok. So it's like a completely hanging thread. I really kind of wish we could have seen Patty Jenkins' version of this movie, because Alan Taylor was fine. I read on IMDb that he was given full creative license, but that he did not like the film he saw, and he blamed post-production tinkering, which I could totally get. There is a very good half hour to 40 minutes of this hour and 55-minute movie. It's from, I would say, about the 55-minute mark until about the hour and a half mark, where Thor and Loki share a lot of screen time together. This is where we get Loki going from two films, Thor and the Avengers, where he was the number one de facto villain, and we start to see Loki as the anti-hero, as the possibly tragic hero, where he's fighting to honor his mother's death. He's fighting because he does feel some kinship to Thor. He's still Loki. He's still sarcastic, and he's still funny. And Hiddleston and Hemsworth have great chemistry together. So for that 30 plus minutes, Thor the Dark World is very entertaining. It's the hour and 10 plus minutes around that 30 minutes that you have to worry about. Most people who are MCU fans, who have watched this franchise from Iron Man to Far From Home, back and forth, they've watched them, they've rewatched them, most people put Thor the Dark World as either their bottom film, their worst film, or bottom three. I don't hate this movie at all, but it's easy to see why it usually tracks very low in people's rankings. I will mention, I was very critical of Iron Man 3 because the post-credit sequence was essentially a long joke. It had no implications to the greater MCU. It had no implications to anything. The end credit scene in Thor the Dark World is fantastic. Let's call it the mid-credit scene, because there is a post-credit scene which is skippable. Thor comes down. He kisses not Natalie Portman. I think it's his actual wife who he kisses. And then we see that giant monster running around. But the mid-credit scene has Volstagg and Lady Sif delivering the ether to Benicio del Toro, the Collector. And for the first time, you start to see the greater universe coming together of the Infinity Stones. He says to them, you already have the Tesseract in Asgard's vault. Why not keep the ether there too? And Volstagg says, well, it's not good to have two Infinity Stones so close to each other. And he slips at the line at the end as they turn and go, 1 down, 5 to go. And like I said earlier, with the Avengers, with my Avengers review, once Thanos is there, in the end credit scene of the Avengers, when you know Thanos is going to be the overarching big bad, and then you start throwing in Infinity Stones, your mind just kind of loses it and starts to go. And it kind of made me forget how kind of slow and plodding this movie was before that scene happened. So it's a great mid-credit scene, a very necessary mid-credit scene. Luckily for the MCU, 2013 was ending, and their next batch of movies were very good. Captain America: The Winter Soldier is going to be next. Talk about going from the bottom to the top. Most people will put that very close to the top. I don't know if I put it very close to the top, but it's definitely better with each viewing. And speaking of that, the film after that is Guardians of the Galaxy, which is one of my favorites. So that's what's coming up on Geeks of Doom with our MCU rewatch. May 7th, as of now, Black Widow is still scheduled to come out, so we will be continuing this countdown all the way until Black Widow, and then we'll try to place her in the franchise. And until we get to Winter Soldier, this has been Danny, and we'll see you next time.